Morning. So I watched this body cam video from Grand Rapids, the shooting of Patrick Lyoya. I think I'm saying that right. Apparently this has become controversial because at some point the body cam got turned off. But I watched the video and just kind of first blush some thoughts. And I think it's an interesting video from a number of perspectives, especially considering kind of recent videos I made about amygdala hijacking, about the intersection of traffic stops and race, I guess you could say, and which is why the shooting became controversial. But also, I guess in light of other high-profile cases, it's just kind of interesting to dissect. First off, it sounds like there was a traffic stop initiated, and the driver is up and out of the car, which is not normal for a traffic stop. My most recent video on the talk we should all be having as far as how to conduct oneself when around the police. I think most people understand, like, you get stopped by the cops, you stay behind the wheel, your hands are at 10 and 2, right? And, you don't make any sudden movements. So when somebody immediately jumps out of a car on a traffic stop, that's a red flag right off the bat, right? And this is not normally how people conduct themselves. This is not kind of what everybody's expectation is going into a traffic stop. And so the immediate question that arises is, what is in the car that you're trying to step away from and put yourself in between, right? So usually when somebody's coming out of the car, it's because they're trying to intercept you, the officer, from finding whatever it is they're trying to conceal. Not always, but that is the thought and the concern when somebody jumps out of the car like that. Red flag number 2, do you have a license? It's a very simple question. Where is your license, right? And driver is kind of playing dumb, right? He eventually, affirms he speaks English, he understands the question, he has one that's in the car, right? He's not producing it. Again, why, right? So does this person have warrants, right? What is the situation with him that he does not want himself to be identified pursuant to this traffic stop? Was weird. It's like somebody sitting on their lap while they were driving. Like one adult sitting on another adult's lap. That's wild. Okay. Sorry, squirrel. Anyway, so yeah, if you're not identifying yourself, so in Oregon, failure to carry and present, right, that's actually a crime. You can be detained up until the point that you can be properly identified, right? So this is Grand Rapids, but I would not be surprised if Michigan had some kind of analogous statute. So he says the license is in the car, and so he's like, well, go get it. Opens the door. I guess there's somebody else in the car. They're blurred out in the video that I saw. I'll put the link to the video in the description. But then Lyoya closes the door and starts to walk away, and so the officer goes to detain him. So tells him stop, right? Now, a big pet peeve of mine, especially when we're talking about body cams, but generally speaking, something that law enforcement could improve on is narrating your actions and verbally articulating why you're doing what you're doing, not just for the suspect, but for the body camera, right? And it's pretty simple to say, hey, you're not free to leave. You are being detained, right? Just to make it clear to everybody, and that is beneficial as well for the suspect in this case, but also for the uninformed viewer who inevitably sees this and doesn't understand what's going on, right? So on a traffic stop, right, the officer has probable cause to detain you temporarily pursuant to whatever violation. If you try to leave from a traffic stop, right, you've already been detained, and if you're now using some kind of force or resistance to remove yourself from the situation when the officers put hands on you and told you stop, right? You're now committing other crimes, right? So we have crime. So now you're going into handcuffs. You're going to be arrested. And I think that's something that people don't understand, right? Just because we started with a traffic stop, right? And whatever the violation was, I don't know the backstory as to why this traffic stop was initiated. Maybe it was a pretext based on, reasonable suspicion of some other crime, or if it was just a garden variety traffic stop. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out later. But I mean, this is just, first blush, right? It is traffic stop, right? You've been detained based on probable cause for a violation. You've now committed a criminal act by using physical force to try and remove yourself from that. And so now you're going into handcuffs, right? And the struggle ensues. So, and that's the issue with the body cam. And there's an Axon logo up in the corner. Axon's the parent company of Taser, right? And it's probably the most widely used body camera system in the country. And it's just a little black box that sits on the outside of a uniform or a vest. And like everything else on a cop's uniform, the physical strength of what is attaching that item to your body is going to vary, right? I was in a foot pursuit the other day and I just started running, and I have a Velcro tie down on my handcuff pouch, but I took off at a dead sprint and whing, there goes one of my sets of handcuffs, and I had to go find it later, right? Just because I started running and the Velcro, maybe it wasn't seated all the way properly or whatever. I've had magazines go flying. I've had all kinds of stuff fly off my uniform, in some kind of rapid physical exertion, whether it's running or fighting or whatever else. That's going to happen. And so the fact that the taser got compressed somehow, that was very obvious that in this physical altercation that, there was body contact up against this taser. It does not surprise me that it got turned off or ripped off or something in the process. And I highly doubt, despite what the instigators might want to tell you, I highly doubt that the officer shut it off because he was trying to conceal something. I'm sure the officer would prefer, under these circumstances, based on what happened, that the body camera was rolling the entire time. There's no reason to turn it off, especially considering you can plainly see in the physical altercation that the officer produces a taser and the suspect latches onto it. So now we've got a weapon in play, right? And we're fighting over a weapon. That's interesting in and of itself. I forget the name of the incident, but there was in Georgia, I believe, really close in proximity to each other. There was an officer that tased somebody, and then there was a suspect in a separate incident that had used a taser against an officer, right? And so the reason those two things happening in close proximity of time to each other, it was interesting because the officer using the taser, the DA in that jurisdiction, I think it was in Atlanta, wanted to charge the officer with assault with a deadly weapon. But the officers who shot the suspect in the subsequent shooting, who took the officer's taser and shot the taser at the officers and then was shot himself, right? And I think it was the same DA was trying to argue that the civilian violator, right, the criminal who had assaulted officers, taken his taser and tried to use it against him, was not using a deadly weapon. So he was trying to have it both ways. And we're having this constant tug of war between whether or not taser is a deadly weapon or a dangerous weapon. And something that people have to understand is that anytime you are contacted by an officer, there is at least one gun in play, right? And as much as we all wish officers were ninjas, and certainly in this Grand Rapids shooting with Lyoya, there is maybe critique to be made about the, physical defensive tactics skills and to physically control somebody. And I can link another video of two very large officers not successfully physically controlling somebody and a shooting resulting. But people don't understand how hard it is to physically control somebody. And if you start losing a fight, a one-on-one fight, it is not uncommon that an officer is disarmed and killed with his own weapon. So if somebody latches onto your taser, then there is the likelihood that they're going to use it against you, physically incapacitate you, and then try to take your gun and execute you with it. So regardless of whether or not you want to say a taser is a deadly weapon, I think generally people would agree it is a less lethal weapon. That is, it's not designed to be lethal, but it can be, depending on the manner used, lethal. Regardless of how you want to classify it that way, if an officer is tased and physically incapacitated, there is a gun in play, right? So this becomes a lethal threat, whether or not the taser itself is a lethal threat. Situation reversed, not necessarily a lethal threat, right? Officers trained to use a taser appropriately in a less lethal manner, right? And so, and again, the officer's purpose in physically incapacitating somebody is not to then take a gun away from them and shoot them with their own gun, right? So there is not a balance in the way that this can play out depending on the roles and the weapons involved, right? It's not analogous depending on which way you point that arrow. And so it's important for people to recognize that. So yes, if you latch onto an officer's taser, and the officer is concerned that they're going to be physically incapacitated by their own taser, you are liable to be subject to the use of deadly force. That is likely to happen. And I'd imagine, sadly, we don't have the video to show us clearly and for sure, which is why this has become controversial, aside from the fact that it's white officer versus black suspect. But yes, like, you are liable to be subject to use of deadly force. And so as you step back from this whole situation, you consider, why were we here and how did we end up where we did, right? There are any number of places along the way where Lyoya could have complied. And I made that video previously, like, is it reasonable to expect people to just comply? And when you talk about, again, amygdala hijacking and the fight or flight part of your brain overwhelming your critical thinking and reasoning part of your brain, it's easy to see how perhaps under stress somebody might try to flee a situation, especially when they know something bad is likely to happen to them because they have warrants or they have contraband or illegal weapons or whatever else in their possession, and they don't want to go to jail. Those things happen, and I don't necessarily fault people for making poor decisions under stress. That said, okay, stop resisting, stop fighting, right? There these repeated commands, right? As we continue to escalate through this incident, right? From, traffic stop to physical detain to physical fight over weapon to deadly force, right? How is the officer supposed to de-escalate in this situation? And the answer is he can't, right? He's giving him opportunities to comply at lesser levels of force all along the encounter. But the suspect chooses to, despite the repeated offer to comply, make escalatory decisions that ultimately resulted in him being shot, right? Now, again, it would have been nice to have the body cam and see precisely why that happened and not just have to rely on the Grand Rapids officer's word on that. But unfortunately, again, based on the reasons I just explained about equipment failures, these things happen. It's not at all surprising, and there's certainly nothing suspicious about it given what we saw in the body cam. So that's my 2 cents on it, but I'd love to hear what you think. Watch the video, watch the other videos that I mentioned. If I remember, I'll drop them in the description below. I mean, do you think you would be able to physically control one of these people in these situations? How effective would that be? If you're losing a fight, and you are introducing, a weapon into the situation because you've been asked to do so, because that is your job. What are you going to do to protect yourself? These are questions people should ask themselves. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Inspiring and uplifting as always. It's been fun. We'll see you on the next one.